So we are learning today about creating products and pricing. These are four of the 4 Ps, right? Or 5 Ps, take your pick. All right, so in this chapter, we learn about the marketing concept and building relationships with your consumers. It's all about figuring out who your customers are, what they want, and then providing that to them. That dictates what your marketing strategy is going to be. We'll also talk about the marketing mix, which is the 4 Ps. So concept that we've spoken about before. We'll talk about how customers make buying decisions and how those differ for consumers versus business customers. Consumers tend to be more emotionally involved with their purchasing decisions, whereas with businesses, it's more practical. How do you take the overall population and divide it into different groups and then figure out which group is your target market? That process of dividing up a population into groups is called segmentation in marketing. And so we'll get into that both in terms of consumer markets and business markets. We'll talk about what a product is and then some of the different classifications, the different types of products. The process for creating new products. We'll get into something called the product life cycle. That relates back to what I was saying about how cell phones last a couple years and then you have to get a new one typically. That's by design. I'm sure companies out there can make cell phones that lasted 10 years, but then they wouldn't sell as many, right? So every product has a life cycle, and companies have to think, okay, what are we going to do when people stop buying our product? We need a new and improved version, right? So that they'll make another purchase. And we'll talk about how to find the right price for your product and trends related to products and pricing. So let's start here with this marketing concept. Now, if you go back, let's say 150 years ago, there weren't that many companies producing things. There weren't that many factories because they were very expensive to start. And the markets weren't that big. There were not nearly as many consumers. We have now 8 billion people in the world, I believe. A lot of consumers. So 150 years ago, there were, I don't know, 1 or 2 billion, something like that. Not as many consumers, not as many companies. And because there weren't that many companies, if you started making a product, chances are people would buy it because they didn't have a whole lot of other choices. Today, that's not the case. You make a product today, not only might there be other companies locally selling the same thing, you're also competing with foreign companies from around the world selling the same product, right? Like if you're trying to sell something online, guess what? Temu probably sells it cheaper. So how do you compete with that? Well, as competition became more competitive, the marketing concept arose. And the marketing concept says you need to understand what it is people either need or want. Because they have so many different options, you really need to understand what they're going to pay for. And then you need to distinguish your product from your competitors. There's a famous saying, I think it was either Thoreau or Emerson, I don't know which. One of them said, this was back in the 19th century, they said, if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. Because you've got this better product, everybody's going to come to you and want to buy it. That's not true anymore. You can have the best product in the world, but you got to market it to people. You have to convince people that they should buy your product, right? And because it's so competitive, you really need to think, how is my product different from my competitors? Now, your product could be a physical product, like a mousetrap. It could be a service, something you do, or maybe your software does for somebody. Or it could even be an idea. Let's say you come up with an idea for a song, and you call up Kanye and you say, hey, here's this song I just came up with. You want to record it? And you just sold him your idea, right? So that's also a product. Whatever product you come up with, there are basically two aspects. There's how do you promote it? How do you make people aware of it and get them to buy it? But then you have to provide the product. You have to actually produce it, right? And in producing it, you have to meet the customer's expectations. So the marketing part of promoting it to them, but also the operational part, which we'll get into in a future chapter, of producing the product, go hand in hand. If you do a great job selling, but you don't have the physical product available to provide to your customer, they're not going to give you any money. On the other hand, you have a great product and you've produced a whole bunch of it and it's sitting in your warehouse and you don't do a good job marketing, again, nobody gives you any money. So they have to go hand in hand. The marketing part and the production of the product. And then you want to run your business in a way that's legal and socially responsible. You think back to our chapter on ethics, we talked about all that. Because if you don't, eventually you're going to get bad press. People are going to stop supporting your company because they don't like you. They don't like the way you operate. So the marketing concept is really all of this. It says, understand what customers want, give it to them in a way that meets their needs, and in a legal and ethical manner, while distinguishing your product from your competitors. So today, that's really necessary because there is so much competition. Does anyone have comments or questions on that marketing concept? Okay. Well, let's talk about some terminology here. Over here, we see value and price. Let's think about how those two words differ. Somebody give me an example, please, of a product that you purchased recently. Could be anything.
A watch.
A watch. Okay. So a watch has a price, right? They don't give them out for free. You have to pay something for it. You might pay a small amount if you're not really concerned about quality. Or you might pay a large amount if you want high quality or like a Rolex that has a lot of status associated with it. I do not wear a Rolex, by the way. This is like a 5-year-old Fitbit that I don't even use for time. Use my phone for that. But there's a price, right? Every product, I guess it could be free. Like I was talking about earlier, there are some things free, but nothing's really free. They're giving it out for free. They're getting something in return, right? So there's the price of the product, whatever it is, but then there's the value. And how is that different? If you buy a watch at the dollar store for $1, it's a low price. Probably also not the greatest value. I mean, maybe if all you need is you want it to work for a week, and that's as long as it lasts, and you're happy with that, okay, you could say that was a good value. But if you're expecting something more, then you might say, oh, I wasted my money. Let me give you an example of that. I once bought a hammer at the dollar store. I don't think there's any place else you can buy a hammer for $1, right? You go to Home Depot, it's gonna be probably $10. And me, often more concerned with price than value, I bought this $1 hammer. And I took it home, and because I had to hammer a nail into the wall. And guess what? The nail was stronger than this metal hammer. And as I'm nailing the nail into the wall, it's not going in. The nail is not going in, and the hammer is bending. And I realized, okay, this was not a great value that I got for my dollar, right? I think I did eventually get the nail in. I had to like grab the head of the hammer and just go like that, because holding it by the handle just wasn't strong enough. So just because you get a low price does not necessarily mean you get a good value. Does that make sense? In fact, if you ask my wife, she will tell you that if you pay a higher price, you get a good value because you're getting something that's higher quality. And sometimes that's true. It's not always true. But if you buy, well, here's her argument. If you buy like a jacket that's $300 and it's handmade from wool or something, it's going to last 20 years. Whereas if you go buy a $20 jacket at Macy's, it's going to fall apart in a couple months. And she's got a point there. Okay, now we talked about value versus price, right? How does value differ from customer satisfaction? Is it possible you could buy something that you think is a good value, but you're still not satisfied? Is that possible? Okay. You think about a restaurant, you might go to a cheap restaurant, you feel like you get a good value, a lot of food, not a lot of cost, and you don't feel so good afterwards. You think, okay, that was a good value in a sense, but at the same time, I don't think I would do that again. I'm not satisfied. So these words are related, right? But they're different. And they relate to the psychology of the customer. How do they perceive the product? How do they feel about the money that they spent and what they got in return? There's a lot of psychology that goes into marketing. I mentioned part of the marketing concept is building relationships with consumers. And you do that by understanding what it is that they want, right? And then providing an experience that they're going to want to come back for and they're going to want to tell other people about. You ever gone to a movie and thought, oh, this is such a great movie, I have to tell my friends about it? You're posting on social media while you're in the movie. And then other people go see the movie because of your recommendation. That's what you want to create as a marketer, that level of enthusiasm. One way companies try to do that is they get you to join their loyalty programs where you give them your contact information. And then what do? They start spamming you with emails and texts. And sometimes that works, right? They're sending you coupons and you go and you keep buying from them, maybe. But then sometimes you're just annoyed. So I don't know that those loyalty programs, as profitable as they are, I don't know that that's the best way to build relationships with customers, but it is one way. Okay, anyone have questions or comments at this point? So you might be familiar with Marriott. Big company, they have a lot of hotels, resorts. They acquired another company called Starwood that owned a whole bunch of hotels and resorts. And that made them an even bigger company. So all of these brands that you see here are hotel chains owned by Marriott, one company. And if you look here, you'll notice that some of these chains, like Courtyard Marriott, Residence Inn Marriott, they include the Marriott name as part of their name. their branding as part of the parent company, right? But then you've got Ritz-Carlton, also owned by Marriott. But notice they left off the Marriott part, right? And same thing with St. Regis. And same thing with W Hotels. Why do you think some of their brands leave off the Marriott name? What do you think, if you hear the term Ritz-Carlton or St. Regis, what do you think about that hotel? Would be cheap or expensive? Expensive, right? These are luxury brand hotels. And the image that they create for their customers and for the public is, hey, we provide the best service, the best experience, but it's going to cost you a lot of money. That's their image. They're not ashamed of it. If they said the Ritz-Carlton by Marriott, that would cheapen it. It's kind of like saying, I don't know, there's no Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. What's a popular but expensive restaurant around here?
BJ's.
BJ's? Okay, it's if you said that BJ's was owned by McDonald's and it said BJ's by McDonald's, that would kind of cheapen the BJ's brand, right? The same thing here. Ritz-Carlton has its own brand image. It has its own relationship with its customers, and it doesn't want to confuse them by mentioning Marriott. And same thing with St. Regis. On the other hand, some of these, mid-level or cheaper brands, they benefit from the Marriott name. This is branding. This is creating an image of your company to appeal to a specific group of customers. Okay, I think that's probably a good place to pause here. Now let's do that. So I'm going to show you a video about brands, which, as I mentioned earlier, are symbols. You see, Ritz-Carlton has a logo and it has a name. St. Regis has a logo, has a name. Those can be trademarked to protect their brand, right? Those brands represent the organization. They help communicate what they're all about. If it were McDonald's, it would be the golden arches, right? And we have a certain expectation when we see that. Salty food, right? Fried food, inexpensive. That goes along with that. That's very different from, well, other fancier restaurants, right? Okay. So let's watch that video about symbols and brands. Think about questions you have. And here it's kind of a fine line between the product itself and promoting the product. When you come up with a product name and a logo, again, you're branding that product, you're forming the image of the product, but you also can use that to promote the product. So that relates to last week's discussion about promotion, as well as this week's discussion about the product itself. All right. So we're going to hear Debbie Millman and her TED Talk about symbols and brands. I think it's interesting what she was saying about how it's not only corporations now that can brand. I guess you can say throughout history, her argument was that brands have been used for religious purposes and other purposes, but really in our lifetimes, Marketing is primarily coming from large companies, right? They're trying to get us to buy stuff. And how powerful now the people can be when they organize, when they join together in a group with a common vision and use some of these same tools of marketing to share their idea, right? Which can be a product. So marketers have to constantly pay attention to the environment. They have to think about all those things we talked about in chapter 1 on economics. We learned about the external environment of business, things like the economy and politics, and what else? Demographic changes. These are all things that are changing in the world that companies can take advantage of. Or if they're caught off guard, they can lose ground, right? Think about like Blockbuster. I don't know if you all really remember Blockbuster, but it used to be that's where you went if you wanted to watch a movie. You go and you rent the VHS tape or the DVD. What happened to Blockbuster?
Blockbuster went out of business.
They did. Netflix happened to Blockbuster. Redbox happened to Blockbuster. Netflix came along, they were sending DVDs through the mail, and then they started streaming movies. And Blockbuster was like, oh, we don't need to do that because everybody's coming into our stores. And Redbox came along and said, you can rent a DVD for $1 from one of our kiosks right here at Safeway. And Blockbuster said, we don't have to do that. Well, they were wrong, right? Pretty soon, consumers started saying, we don't need to go to Blockbuster anymore. You can just drop by Redbox or download the video and stream it. So Blockbuster did not do a very good job of scanning the environment to see how consumer preferences were changing, see how technology was changing, to see how their competitors were changing. And it cost them dearly. Every company needs to know who its target market is, who is most likely to buy their product. Does Redbox still exist? They still have some of their kiosks out there. I don't see them as much as I used to, but who do they appeal to? Maybe somebody that doesn't have a high-speed internet connection, can't really stream, and wants to just pick up a movie while they're at the grocery store, right? That's their target market. And Netflix lets Redbox have that market. Netflix could put kiosks with DVDs, but they're not interested, right? They're going for a broader appeal. So every company has to decide who is it that they are trying to sell to. And what is it, again, that differentiates your product from your competitors? That was part of the marketing concept, right? Maybe your costs are lower. And if your costs are lower, then you can charge a lower price. That might attract certain customers. But maybe you differentiate your product by the characteristics of the product itself, right? The iPhone is not the cheapest phone out there by far. Why do people buy it? It's one of the most user-friendly phones. There's a status, right? So Apple has differentiated the product itself. People buy it because they want that product. Companies can differentiate by the service that they offer. You go to Ritz-Carlton and you check in your room and the pillow's not soft enough. Pick up the phone, dial 0, get the front desk and say, can you send up softer pillows? And they will be up there within minutes. Try that at Motel 6. They'll be like, sorry, you get what you get, right? So Ritz-Carlton is known for their service. And then some companies differentiate themselves by focusing on a very narrow market. Like maybe a hotel that's anime themed. That's appealing to people that are into anime, which I know is a lot of people, right? But not a lot of people that are into anime also stay in hotels. So it's a pretty small segment of the population that would probably book a room there, right? That's a niche market, or sometimes people say niche market. You can say it either way. I don't know if you're familiar with Seth Godin. You can find him online. He's a marketing guru. He's written a lot of books about marketing. One of his books is called Purple Cow, I believe. I didn't read it. I'm going to be honest with you. I haven't read it. But notice if you look at these 5 figures, which one stands out? The one with the purple tie, right? Because it's different. Now, not everybody wants a purple tie, but it gets your attention. So you have to think, what is it about my company that's going to be unique? Something that I can do that my competitors can't do very well. And I build my strategy around that. And then I promote the heck out of that. So that people know if that's what somebody wants, they know they come to me. Any questions, any comments? All right, so we're familiar with the 4 Ps or the 5 Ps. I think the textbook says the 5th P is packaging. This image says the 5th P is people. But the traditional 4 Ps of marketing are product, price, place, and promotion, right? Okay. And that is called the marketing mix. Now, the importance of this concept is if you want to be successful, and why would you go into business if you didn't want success? You need to have a strategy in each of these areas. You need to think, what is going to be special about my product? What is the right price? What is the right place or distribution for my product? And what is the right way to promote it? When you're working on your business plan assignment, right? I think I talked about that a little bit last week. I don't remember, did I run out of time and say I was going to go into more detail later? Is that in this class? Okay. So, and we can definitely talk about it more in the coming weeks. But as you're working on it, you've got a marketing mix slide as part of that assignment. Whatever business idea you're going to be writing about, whatever business you would like to create someday, you're going to want to think through your strategies and think, what's going to be special about my product? Don't just tell me what your product is on that marketing mix slide. Why is that your product? Why did you pick that particular price? Why is that the right place? Why is that the right promotion? Sell your strategy on that slide. Let's walk through an example. Let's pick a nonprofit organization. And let's think, would they be able to use this marketing mix even though they're nonprofit? Somebody give me an example of a nonprofit organization.
Vita.
Who?
Vita, Esteban, United Way.
United Way. And you think about their tax program? Are you associated with it?
No, we participate as a can we do taxes transfer for this season?
You're doing tax preparation through the Vita program.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, the United Way, they're a nationwide nonprofit. They might even operate in other countries. They do a lot of good work. They run the 211 phone program. So anybody in Monterey County from an 831 phone number, you just call 211, and they can connect you to all kinds of different services. It's a great thing that they do. They do a lot of things at United Way. And one thing that they do is they have this program where they train people on how to help others with their income taxes. And so, Karina, you're actually doing that.
Anyway.
Wonderful. So, and it's not easy. I know people who've gone through it. It's a lot of training and a lot of work, especially at tax time.
Yeah, no, a little stressed.
A little stressful. But that's great because there's some people that don't know how to file their taxes. Maybe they don't have money to pay and they can go, is it free? Or
It's free.
it's free. They go for free and get help filing their taxes. It's great. So, okay, if you're the United Way and you've put together this VITA program to help people with their taxes, that is your product, right? Or at least for the VITA program, that's the product. It's really a service, helping people with their taxes. The price, in this case, is zero, right? They could charge money, but they decided for what they want to achieve, they wanted it to be free. Where's the place where you can get that service?
We have different locations.
Different
Parkland
locations.
College here.
Okay,
We have another one
And
and
CT.
so different community locations where people can come. And how do they promote it to let people know that they can get their taxes done?
like flyers.
Flyers?
Yeah.
So they've had to think through this whole process because why put together this service, right? I'm sure it cost them money. They had to invest money to train people and promote this and secure the location. And they're doing this because they want to serve the community. But if they didn't somehow promote it and nobody knew about it, it would be a wasted effort. So even a nonprofit organization has to market. They have to think through all of these steps. Speaking of steps, let's look at the steps involved with decision-making. And after this slide, we will do our group discussions. If you are driving along, okay, and you start to feel hungry, you've now identified a need. You need food, right? If you want to satisfy your hunger, you need some food. Or at least you could say you want some food. Now, this process that we go through is very similar to the decision-making process that I told you about previously in a different chapter. And sometimes we might do it just within a second, we go through this whole process. Or sometimes if it's a bigger decision, it might take us weeks or months. But we all go through this process when we decide to buy something. First, we recognize we have a need or a want. Then we look at what are the options. There's BJ's over there, McDonald's over here, Geno's over there.
There's Taco Bell,
Taco Bell,
In-N-Out,
In-N-Out.
Subway.
There's also go home and raid the refrigerator. Go to your aunt's house and raid her refrigerator, right? Jen's like, that's a good idea. So we've got some options. That's our information search. We could also pull over. You don't want to do this while you're driving. Pull over, do a search on your phone. What are some other options to get some food? And then you evaluate your alternatives. Okay, well, this one's going to cost me more money. This one's going to take longer. This one's farther away. After that evaluation, you make a decision. And then you go, you purchase your food. But it's not over. You then evaluate and say, was that a good decision? Did I get a good value? Am I satisfied with my purchase, right? And then we use that experience to help us make even better decisions in the future. Every customer goes through this process, again, maybe in a second, or if you're buying a home, it could be months or years that you go through this process. But it's important for marketers to understand this and understand all the things that influence our decisions, because the marketers try to figure out how they can sneak in there, for example, by having an ad pop up on our phone. They saw that, maybe Gmail saw that we sent an email about searching for a home. And then all of a sudden, we start getting ads about homes, and we're like, how did they know that I'm thinking about buying a home? Right? All marketers have access to big data, and they use it to promote things. So at every step, the marketer wants to sneak in there and try to influence your decision. And with technology, they can sometimes do this in ways we don't even know we're being influenced. All right, questions or comments? Okay. All right, so let's take 8 minutes, get into your groups, come up with your group questions, all right? And then we'll cover a couple more slides after that.
It might quite have signal.
Okay. So how do you segment the market? How do you take the entire 8 billion people in the world and divide them up into different groups so you can figure out which group is most likely to buy your product? Well, the textbook tells us there are 5 methods of segmentation. You can segment by where people live, which is geographic, by things like age, gender, occupation. These are demographic ways to segment the market. Then the textbook talks about benefit segmentation. In other words, what benefit are they looking for in this product? In this graphic, it's also called behavioral. So, for example, are they looking for status? Are they trying to buy a Rolex so that they can feel like they're a better person, right? Because they equate wealth with status. Or are they looking to buy the newest gadget out there because they like to be cutting edge when it comes to technology? What is it that they're trying to get? What is the benefit they're seeking from the product? You could also divide up the market by psychographics. What people feel, what they think. This relates to things like their lifestyle, their attitudes, how much education they've had. This influences their mind, right? And then by volume. Do they buy in small quantities or large quantities, right? Somebody living on their own is not going to buy as many groceries as a family of 8, right? Who will buy in larger quantities. So you can divide up and figure out who's your target market by describing them with these different characteristics. I'll give you an example. In 1932, Frito-Lay's came up with the Fritos product, which is, as I'm sure you've heard it, maybe you've had it before. It's basically made from corn, fried in vegetable oil with some salt. Very simple product. And it's still on the market, right? It's been what, 90 years, 92 years?
Yeah.
And who does it appeal to? Primarily males in their 30s and 40s who are hungry and just want something quick, cheap, not the best flavor in the world, right? But it'll do the job if you're hungry. Now, 3 decades later, the same company comes out with Doritos, which is basically the same product. They just add some cheddar cheese, change the shape, and they call it Doritos, right? That has an appeal more to the teen consumer, again, mostly male. Then in the 80s, the same company comes out with Tostitos. Still the same basic product, right? However, they're using white corn, so it's a little fancy, as opposed to yellow corn. And so this is more likely to be served at a party, right? You're not going to put out a bowl of Fritos typically, but you might put out a bowl of Tostitos. So same basic product, right? But divided up into slight variations for different target markets. Make sense? Left my timepiece over here.
Oops, flag on the play.
We got a minute left. Let's see. Okay, one last slide and we'll be done. For today at least. Business markets. If you are trying to sell your product to businesses, well, guess what? They buy in larger quantities than consumers, but there aren't as many businesses as there are consumers, right? So you have a smaller audience, but they're likely to buy more from you. Where they're located is going to differ. Consumers are everywhere, pretty much. Businesses tend to be in industrial centers or corporate office parks, that kind of place. And they tend to not come to your retail location. Instead, they'll order the product maybe online or over the phone and then expect it to be shipped, which consumers do sometimes, right? But businesses do most of the time. Okay, I think that's all we have time for today. See you on Thursday. Okay.